Morning, everybody. My name's Ruth Slavid. I am your chair for the day, and I'd just like to welcome you to this PIP seminar in association with Kingspan and Oscar Acoustics on the subject of health and well-being. I hope you're all feeling well this morning. I'm sure whether you are or not, both your health and your well-being are things that you have been interrogating more in the last few months than probably ever before. And obviously this is a pressing concern for architecture as we think about whether and how we might go back to our offices, about how our homes work for us, and about all those other spaces as well, which some of us at least have been getting back into. So I think we're all concerned about this. What is great is that there are some people who have been thinking about it hard for quite some time. And they are, if you like, ahead of the curve, and they are going to share their expertise with us this morning. What's going to happen is that each of the speakers is going to speak for around about 15 or 16 minutes, and then we will have an opportunity for questions. And if you have a look at the buttons, which are probably on the bottom of your screen, they're certainly on the bottom of mine, there's a Q&A button and there's a chat button. And I would ask you please to use these for different purposes. If you have questions to ask the speakers, if you could put those questions into the Q&A, that would be great. Obviously, if you've got any general comments about how you feel about the event or whatever, we would be interested, and you can put that into the chat. But in particular, I know we've got people registered who've come from all over the world. And I know that at past events, we have had wonderful representation geographically. So if you would kindly, when you have a moment, just pop in to the chat section, something just saying where you are at present, probably city and country would be great. I mean, if you're in the UK, do give us your location here as well. We're just as interested in that, but just pop that in for us. And I think all I have to do now is introduce our first speaker, who, as I said, will have will, I hope, speak for a little under 20 minutes so that we can take some questions to him, because he sounds absolutely fascinating. He is Ben Channon, who is Head of Wellbeing at ASSAEL Architecture, which I suspect, through his own interests and research, is probably a position that he created for himself. And he certainly has taken and run with the subject, including publishing a book on it. So Ben, over to you. As I said, if you can be not filling your entire 20 minutes, then we'll have a chance to take questions as well.
No worries. Thanks very much, Ruth. What I'm going to do is just share my screen and hope that you can all see my presentation. Ruth, just if you could confirm you can see that.
Yes, I can.
I will assume everybody else can. Thank you so much, firstly, for having me. And thank you for everybody for giving up your time this morning, tuning in to learn about this subject. I'm glad to see so many people interested in it. It's obviously something that I'm really passionate about. So yeah, I'm going to try and cram as much into this 20 minutes as I can, really. So I'm going to start, not to blather on about myself, but really more just to kind of set the scene. And my backstory is quite important in this. So there's a picture of me there on the left as a young-ish architect. And when I was in my mid-20s, I actually had problems myself with my mental health. Basically burned myself out and just gave myself problems with anxiety and things, which I was very lucky. I got really good help from the NHS, and also really got into kind of mindfulness and trying to learn about that side of the brain as well. And that actually started to inform what I was doing as an architect. I came off the back of that experience and wanted to try to understand better how the buildings that I was designing and creating were impacting people. So I delved into the worlds of neuroscience and environmental psychology and looked at some of the amazing research that was going on there. And I'm going to share some of that with you guys today. But really that kind of snowballed and eventually went from being a sort of internal design guide for our practice at ASSAEL, and grew into my first book, Happy by Design, which was published through RIBAJ. So thank you very much to RIBAJ for that. But really, yeah, I was amazed at just how much interest there was off the back of that book. And I was really fortunate to get asked to do a TED talk in the middle of there, TEDx talk, I should say, in the middle there, and have been asked to write numerous articles on the subject for RIBAJ Journal, for the AJ, and even it's sort of the Times, Telegraph, and BBC News. So it's not saying this to blow my own trumpet, more just to highlight that this is a subject that people are really engaging with, and it's been amazing to see so many people start to really in between. Thought I'd include the group on the end there, which is the Architect Mental Wellbeing Forum, which is a group that I helped set up as well to try to improve architecture, mental health within architecture, just as a bit of an aside. And then I'm also involved with the Well Building Standard. I'm not going to touch on this so much today, but that's really about trying to improve both physical and mental health through design and policies in the way that buildings run. I believe some of our later speakers are going to talk about well certified buildings, so I'll leave that to them to expand on the well standard. But I am part of the advisory board for the MIND concept, so trying to help the Well Building Standard to ensure that their standard is actually really targeted, creating buildings that are good for our mental health and happiness. And a quick slide about us at ASSAEL. We are based in Putney, southwest London. We've got around 100 staff, and we're primarily focused on residential projects. As Ruth quite rightly pointed out, the head of wellbeing role is one I kind of had to create for myself, really. I don't know if there's any other architects out there with that job title at the moment, which is fun, but it's really about trying to make sure that everything we do has a strong focus on health and well-being, and we're really making the right decisions for the right reasons, and they're led and driven by human health. So, talking about mental health, I just wanted to start off by really addressing the problem. It's quite timely. Last week was Suicide Awareness Week, Suicide Awareness Day on Friday, I believe, and it's still a huge problem. For example, if we just look at construction sites, far more construction workers now die from suicide, sadly, than do from on-site accidents. It's nearly 2 construction workers take their own life every single day, and that's just within one industry. So if we look at this stat, 1 in 4 people will experience a mental health problem every single year, and 1 in 6 people will experience a diagnosable mental health problem every week. So one of the problems with mental health is that we don't necessarily see when people are struggling. People do tend to hide it far more than they would a physical ailment, partly because it's easier to hide, but partly because there is still a big stigma about it. We've come a long way in the sort of 6-7 years since I had my problems with mental health, but we've still got a long way to go to destigmatize it. So it's far more prevalent than we might think, and we, I believe, have a job to do to improve that. But what does this have to do with us as architects? Well, actually, people spend about 90% of their time inside buildings, and obviously in 2020 that stat has risen even further. So we as architects have an opportunity to really affect people a lot of the time, because they are in our buildings so much of the time. And even if they're not in buildings, people now, 55% of people live in cities, big towns. So actually, when they're not in the buildings, chances are they have buildings nearby, or they're in plazas, parks, whatever it might be, that are also often designed by architects and urban designers. So we have a really big opportunity to shape the places in which people are spending their time. And interestingly, trying to bring this back to architecture and the link between architecture and mental health, I was part of a really interesting panel earlier in the year at Westminster looking at MPs wanting to look at the relationship between housing and mental health, and this fascinating stat came up. 1 in 5 people has actually directly kind of blames their housing for their mental health, or problems with their mental health. So it's something that's definitely having an impact on people, and we as architects need to get a better understanding, I believe, of what factors are actually impacting people's mental health in their homes. Now, I often show people this image. It's obviously well, the issue of aesthetics is fairly subjective, but I think you could all agree that if you were coming home to the house on the right every night instead of the house on the left, you would certainly feel more positive as you arrived home. You would have a better sense of pride, a sense of self, probably better pride in your community as well. So it's going to have a huge impact on all kinds of quite complex self-actualization ideas right at the top there of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but very, very important things, you know, and perhaps also our sense of safety too, which is fundamentally important to our mental well-being. So you can see when you just look at one anecdotal example like this, it's quite easy to imagine that absolutely it's going to have an impact on our mental health. But what's really interesting now, as I said at the start, is that we have a huge amount of data that we can mine into, not really coming from architects too much. There's a little bit out there from architects, but actually loads of it coming from the world of environmental psychology. So really interesting studies, for example, a study looking at daylight, the effect of daylight on office workers, where there was two groups, one in a office with 0 natural daylight and one in a well-lit office. And the workers in the basement with no daylight actually ended up, it affected their circadian rhythm so badly, across the length of the study, they got 46 minutes less sleep every night. So you can imagine the impact that's going to have, not just on your physical health, but also on your mental health. And that's just a simple change. Bringing some daylight into a space can have a huge impact on how people feel every single day. Secondly, when we look at nature, where there's perhaps the largest body of study around the idea of the impact on our mental health. And just one study where they looked at office workers, and researchers just put some small potted plants, nothing too big, in an office where there previously been none, and they measured change in productivity over the next few weeks, and they saw a 15% increase just by the introduction of these plants. So again, we know that actually bringing in plants has a whole raft of positive benefits that I'll go on to talk about in a minute, and we can prove that with data. And finally, final study I wanted to mention, where researchers put people in messy rooms versus tidy rooms and tested their saliva, and they actually found in messier spaces people had increased levels of cortisol in their saliva, which is a stress hormone. So people are genuinely biologically more stressed by mess, so don't feel bad if you are too. So I want to just quickly touch upon how we've got to where we've got to, and perhaps where things have gone wrong, which sounds a bit critical, but hopefully you'll realise when I've made my point that I'm not being too critical. It's the way the world has gone. I was having a really interesting conversation yesterday, actually, with a lady called Dr. Elizabeth Lindsay, who is a National Geographic explorer. She's also an anthropologist, and she does a lot of work with indigenous peoples and very isolated tribes of people, perhaps, you know, living in the middle of the Amazon, places like that. And she was actually saying that within a lot of these groups, you see very, very low rates of mental health problems, and it's really interesting. And she partly believes that that's, you know, down to the way they live their lives, their values, and the fact that they're kind of connected to where we have evolved from. And so I thought I'd include this image of prehistoric Homo sapiens. It was, I believe, drawn by a 18th century, 19th century German artist. I've unfortunately hidden my notes at the bottom there, so I hope you can see them. And obviously it's kind of shaped by his Western idea of what it might have been like to be a caveman or a cavewoman, but it's helpful to make a point. We can look at this image and really try to get an understanding of where we've come from as humans. And it's important to remember, you know, we've evolved as a species it's taken us millions of years to get to where we've got to. But anyway, this was probably, I don't know, 40, 50,000 years ago, say, and where we did still live in caves, troglodytes, and we live very much with nature. So we were hunters, we had to catch our own food, we were very social, we were very tribal, we lived in close-knit groups, and people would often live in much larger households, if you want to use that word, than we do now. People were obviously wired for danger because you never knew when a bear or saber-toothed tiger could come and attack you. But more importantly, we really were a part of nature. We were constantly we were living side by side with nature. And sometimes I think we talk about nature as humans now with there's us and nature over there, but actually we are a part of nature. We are animals, and we forget that sometimes. And finally, we obeyed the rhythms of sun and moon, day and night, and we really listened to those. We would go to sleep when the sun went down. Whereas if I contrast it with where we are today, the modern Homo sapien, you know, we deliberately actually disengage our senses. We put in headphones so we don't have to, we can drown out the sort of noise and things that are going on around us. We aren't anywhere near as active. We don't have to hunt our food. We can sit down all day and watch TV or Netflix if we want to, or scroll through Instagram. We tend to be quite isolated as well. And again, the headphones help to illustrate that, but We certainly don't live in these bigger family groups anywhere near as much as we do now. Yeah, that sense of social community has gone in many ways. I was talking about those rhythms of sun and moon and day and night. We definitely don't follow those anymore. We've thankfully discovered electricity in the light bulb. However, that means that we now can choose to stay up till 3 in the morning if we want, still having to get up at 7 for work, of course. We don't have any or anywhere near as many immediate threats. We're much less likely to get eaten on a daily basis at the moment, which is a good thing, I think. But it does mean that we still have this amygdala, this fight or flight response in our brain, which is constantly trying to protect us, except it's kind of going haywire because it doesn't have that much to protect us from, which is where a lot of our anxieties come from in modern life. We aren't very connected to nature, as I mentioned. We've got this idea of us being in one place, nature being in another place. Nature is a nice thing to go and visit. It's not something we belong in or live in necessarily. And we actually, interestingly, have fairly limited control over our environment. We might think technology has empowered us, and in many ways, of course, it has. But actually, your home, it's quite difficult to change your home these days. Homes tend to be pretty fixed, pretty inadaptable. We can't just sort of move walls around in the way that our Homo sapien ancestors could. So yeah, all in all, things have changed very, very rapidly when you consider, the entire evolution of us as a species. Really, in the last probably 5,000 or 6,000 years, have we started living in kind of cities, and things have really changed, obviously, very dramatically within the last 100, 200 years or so. So my question to you is, have we actually forgotten where we came from? Are we designing for those ancient Homo sapiens that really, biologically, we still are those people? So moving on to some of the lessons that we can bring into our buildings as architects, learning from some of those ideas. These were actually the chapters of my book, and I'll just kind of run through quite quickly with you guys, just for way of time, some of those key features. But as you can see, they're broken down into a series of kind of key concepts, which I didn't set out to write the book and think, okay, I'm going to have a chapter on light and a chapter on comfort and so on. I started by gathering data, finding what research was out there, and these chapters naturally started to form themselves. Of course, as you all know, within architecture, there's massive overlaps, everything's connected. So if we increase daylight, it may negatively impact our comfort because it may get hotter in a space and so on. So it was also very interesting for me to try and understand those synergies and overlaps and conflicts too. So in terms of designing for daylight, the first chapter of my book, now it's obviously one of the first things we get taught at architecture school. It's the importance of light, and so I'm not going to preach too much about that. But just in terms of the science, if you do get clients coming to you and saying, why is light so important? I don't really care about daylight. Well, actually, biologically, everyone cares about daylight. It's been a part of our survival mechanism. I mentioned earlier the circadian rhythms. In the morning, daylight tells our bodies to wake up. It tells our bodies that it's the daytime, and as it gets warmer, the light gets warmer and oranger throughout the day. It starts to tell our bodies that it's time to go to sleep. We obviously don't listen to that all the time with phones and blue lighting and even kind of lighting above our heads, artificial lighting. But the daylight should be having a huge impact on how awake or tired we feel. And similarly, I'm sure you'll all be aware of things like seasonal affective disorder. There has been connections shown between a lack of sunlight and drops in serotonin levels. And of course, we could talk about the physical side of these things too. Mental health and physical health are obviously very interconnected, and things like vitamin D we could go into, but I'm going to stick mostly to the mental health side of things. Second point, really, I talked about comfort, and this can take many forms. This can be about being thermally comfortable, being physically comfortable, being in a comfy ergonomic chair. Acoustic comfort is something that's been highlighted by the World Health Organization as a big problem worldwide, and it's actually estimated to have a huge impact in terms of people's quality and length of life, because if you're living in a place where you can't get any peace and quiet, that is linked to, unfortunately, things like higher risk of heart attacks. So comfort on a basic level is very important, but I also believe it's really important we think about spaces in terms of tactility, spaces that do engage the senses. I talked earlier about we live in a bit of a society now where actually we don't necessarily engage our senses that much. There's sort of white painted plasterboard everywhere that doesn't exactly scream out to be touched and interacted with. But some great projects here, like this Proctor and Matthews project, where the brickwork and the timber really encouraging you to actually engage with your senses and make us more mindful, which leads to less rumination, which can make us more positive and more happy. This is one of our projects, and I just wanted to include it to talk about the subject of control. We really believe that it's fundamentally important to give people more control, more autonomy, and allow them to choose how they use their spaces. So this is a shared residence space in a build-to-rent apartment building. We really know now that control has a huge impact on how positive people feel in a space. So interesting, a really good example is in New York, where in a lot of New York, Manhattan, they took away the push buttons on pedestrian crossings, so people hated it. So they brought them back in. A lot of them don't actually do anything anymore. It's the same in London. A lot of the buttons you push don't do anything, but they make people feel better because they give an illusion of control. And even that illusion of control is enough to make people feel like they have more say in their life, and they're in charge of their destiny, and people feel more positive, reduces stress and feelings of anxiety. I've already touched upon nature, so I won't dwell on it too long. There's plenty out there, plenty of research out there on biophilia, and I would really encourage you to go out and look that up. Oliver Heath's website is actually fantastic. I'd point you in the direction of that if you want to read some more about this, and I'm sure people will talk about it more later in the session today. But we've seen things like bringing in plants, biophilia can reduce crime rates, putting people in physical contact with natural materials can reduce heart rates and blood pressure. So as I said earlier, we are a part of nature. It's really important we don't forget that. And often, there have been times and trends within architecture to not bring nature into our buildings too much. But it's really important that we find ways to do that. Always controversial one with architects, the question of taste and beauty. So I'll be very careful what I say. But what we do know is that whatever your idea of beauty is, there has been correlation shown between happier people and living in aesthetically beautiful places. And of course, legibility is really important. Particularly comes into place when we're thinking about design equity. And a good example would be designing a place where someone with dementia perhaps can easily find their way around. We know that more legible places make people feel better and are much easier to use, lead to a greater quality of life. I'm going to touch quickly on activity and exercise. I'm sure you're all very, very aware of the physical benefits of being active, and probably by now the amount that's been talked about the mental health benefits as well. But as I said, the mood benefits of just a short amount of exercise there can last almost all day. So we need to design buildings that encourage people to use the stairs or use ramps or to walk around rather than take the lift. Try and design buildings that make it easier to cycle or make it easier to use gym or exercise equipment too. And finally, the kind of psychological impact, as I talked about earlier, these ideas of safety, of pride in place, but also of creating community. We know that, as the fact at the bottom says there, when people have a greater sense of self-esteem, they're happier. And I believe that where we live has a huge impact on our sense of pride and our sense of self-esteem, as those apartment images that I showed you earlier kind of highlight quite well. And finally, home, something I just wanted to include there. When we're designing houses, sometimes I think that idea of home gets lost, and there's a temptation to talk about houses or apartments as units, which I would try to urge people away from. But the psychological, we're helping a university at the moment with a research project into the value of home in both modern and ancient times. And some of the things that they're coming up with are absolutely amazing, but fundamentally our home is really vital to our sense of happiness and mental well-being. I won't talk about this too much because I'm aware I've pretty much hit my 20 minutes, but this is just some research that we did during COVID. I just wanted to touch upon it because it's really important that we do take things into consideration that have happened this year. But this was a study we did, and very interesting for us to find out that one of the things people said they appreciated the most about their home was actually natural light, which, yes, they did think that the size of their home and the outdoor space was important, but natural light shone through as the most important feature, which was both surprising and quite pleasing. So I'll circulate this presentation anyway. If anybody wants it, I'm sure it will be made available. So there's just a set of notes there, which I usually put in when I present to students because I tend to find they don't pay a lot of attention till the very last slide. So those notes are in there for you guys anyway, if you want them. And yeah, that's everything from me. I slightly run over, so apologies, Ruth, but thank you very much.
Thank you. You have slightly run over, and therefore I think we're going to have to be rather truncated on the issue of questions. I'll just throw this one in, and I'm not even sure that it needs an answer, but I think it's interesting to think about, particularly when you showed, you know, the sort of very early man in touch with nature. And obviously nature wasn't all good, because you were a bit scared of being eaten by the saber-toothed tiger or whatever. But, and I thought it was quite interesting that somebody submitted a question about towers in China with lots of vegetation on them, and said, oh, but mosquitoes have taken up residence, and actually so the residents are having a hard time. What do you do about it? And I'm really just leaving this in the air for you, rather than asking you to respond, because I think it is interesting that actually what we want is nature and biodiversity, as long as it's the nice stuff, you know, pretty plants, nice birds, but no mosquitoes, no rats, no cockroaches. And I just think it's an interesting question that we're going to have to address. But I am going to move on. I'm just going to say that in the chat, there is a note from Charmian at the RIBA saying that Ben's book is available at a special price to delegates. And rather wonderfully, somebody else under that said they bought the book 2 weeks ago. It's absolutely fantastic. And that's why they've come to the seminar. So I think that you couldn't have a better ringing endorsement. But I am going to move on to our next speakers now, who are Alun Jones and Biba Dow from Dow Jones, who are architects with a fantastic track record. I'm not going to run through it because you have got access to all the notes about the speakers. They are going to talk about their Maggie's Place in Cardiff, which I've seen, and again, as one would expect, it is a fabulous building, and we're very lucky to be able to learn more about it, especially when we find it slightly difficult to get around the country and actually see buildings in the flesh. So you've got 20 minutes between the two of you, and if you can stop slightly early, we can take some questions.
Sure.
Thanks, Ruth, and thanks, Ben. That was really fascinating. So we're going to start by we're going to take you through our building at Maggie's, which is built in the grounds of Velindre Hospital, one of the few dedicated cancer hospitals in the country. So it serves the city and also a huge outlying rural area of southwest Wales. So very much straddling an urban environment, or suburban I should say, and a rural environment. The organisation was founded by an extraordinary woman called Maggie and her husband Charles Jenks, and she was a landscape designer and he was an architect. And so they came to the problem that they encountered when Maggie was diagnosed with breast cancer, very much with an awareness of what design could do to improve Maggie's life and experience and those of her fellow sufferers. And they put together a pioneering model of care. So this is non-medical care. It supports dedicated NHS cancer hospitals and departments. And its ethos is about supporting patients. Many of the things Ben mentioned about making people feel empowered and making decisions and being actively involved with their surroundings are at the core of the brief that Maggie wrote about her experience of cancer and her idea for how we as architects could make a better place. And I just wanted to read to you just a few lines, because I think they're incredibly human and remind us of what is important about designing. She says, in general, hospitals are not patient friendly. Simply finding a way around is exhausting. There's quite a long description, but she goes on to say, waiting time could be used positively. Sitting in a pleasant but by no means expensive room with thoughtful lighting, a view out to the trees, birds and skies, and chairs and sofas arranged in various groupings could be an opportunity for patients to relax and talk. An old-fashioned ladies' room with its own hand basin and a proper door supplies privacy for crying, water for washing the face, and a mirror for getting ready to deal with the world outside again. And I think that's so much her ethos that's part of the brief that they give every architect who designs a building for them.
So I'm now going to talk briefly about the design ideas behind our Maggie Centre. This is a drawing by an American artist called Elizabeth Vellicott of the hills of South Wales. Now, our building being located in Cardiff in South Wales, we very much wanted to make our building have a very deep resonance with the local neighbourhood, with the local environment, but in particular with nature. The site that we were given was quite difficult, let's say, quite challenging. It was a triangular corner of the hospital car park. The hospital there in the background looks like quite a lot of hospitals do in the UK. So this is the site plan. As you can see, the cancer hospital has an extraordinary footprint, and this is the site we were given, which was the triangle in the corner of the car park. But the thing that excited us about the site was this line of trees. The whole of our project was based on an idea of how we could take this rather grim car park site and return it somehow to nature. These two slides were very important at the beginning of the project. On the left is Pen y Fan, which is the tallest of the Brecon Beacons, which is a local mountain range. And the form and colours and textures of the Brecon Beacons was instrumental in how we thought about our project. And then on the right is a local Welsh farm building. What interests us about the vernacular buildings of South Wales is how wrinkly tin, corrugated iron, has been appropriated by farmers and is used for many, many things, from rebuilding their barns to making fences and replacing hedges. And so corrugated iron, and particularly in its rusted form, has become a sort of indigenous vernacular material in South Wales. But also corrugated iron was an essential component of the industrial archaeology and the industrial architecture that defines so much of South Wales. Another aspect of our project, which again was very important to its genesis, was a collaboration that we had with a Welsh artist called Ozzy Rhys-Osmond. Ozzy made, this is a painting he made specifically for our Maggie Centre in Cardiff, and it's the last piece of work Ozzy made before, unfortunately, he died from cancer. But Ozzy was an extraordinary character, a firebrand, a painter, a political activist, a raconteur. He was an amazing character. But what his art looks at is a sort of social geography, topography of South Wales. And so at the heart of our building is a painting by Ozzy. Another thing that we wanted to think about with our building is how we could provide spaces within the building that connected it explicitly to Wales or to South Wales. And so this is a picture of a chimney in an ancient farmhouse at a place called St Fagans, just outside Cardiff. And what we were interested in is, in Welsh, there's a word called cwtch, and to cwtch means to cuddle or to hug, but a cwtch is also a little space under the stairs or an ingle nook. It's a place where you go for protection or shelter. And we were interested in this idea of cwtch and how effectively what Maggie's buildings are trying to do is to provide a cwtch. So this was an idea about what our cwtch could be like, and then a very early sketch of our building. So what we were thinking was that the form of the building would replicate the topography of the local landscape, and that we would make our building out of orange rusted corrugated iron. One of the characteristics of the local topography is all of the hills are covered in bracken, and in the autumn all of the hills around Cardiff go this amazing orangey brown colour. So we thought if we used a core 10 weathering steel corrugated iron, then our building could be the same colour as the local topography. And then another key aspect of our building is that you would enter via a small courtyard garden, you would travel through our building, and then the trees, the only bit of nature on the site, would then be presented to you behind the building. So this is a little diagram of the project. So it's showing the enclosing wall of corrugated iron, and then the courtyard garden that you enter through. And then inside the building, these 4 blue objects are objects made out of Douglas fir triboard that define the range of spaces within the building. What we very much didn't want to do was to make a series of rooms, but we wanted to make a series of interconnected spaces or territories that were divided by these timber objects, in order that we could break down the distinctions within the building, but also to create a stronger connection between being in the building and with nature. We're very interested in the early work of Donald Judd and how he worked with banal, everyday materials like Douglas fir plywood, and through intent elevated them to the level of art. So this was the very early concept model for the building, and this is us this is Laura Lee, who's the chief executive of Maggie's, and this was the meeting where we unveiled the idea and presented it to Laura. And so this then is an early elevation sketch that was looking at the main entrance and how our building, like I say, could be this rusty mountain range. And so this, this diagram then is talking about the car park and if you like, the brutality of the car park, and then how our building sits as this little mountain range in front of this bigger mountain range, and contains a special courtyard garden that then presents to you the trees in the background. And then as a diagram, this explains how the building works. So you leave the car park, you go into the courtyard, you enter the building, and on this long axis through the building, you see Aussie's painting, which is on the side of the Kutch. You move into the building, and then you have this view of this borrowed bit of nature represented to you. So what effectively we were trying to do was to, in our very small building, it's only 240 square meters, was to unveil a narrative journey, if you like, from the city and the car park back through to the countryside.
And we were lucky to collaborate with Cleve West, who's a brilliant gardener and champion of the sort of everyday aspect of gardening. And he, these are his drawings that were looking at the sort of the unexplored bits of life, the uncelebrated bits of life in tangles and in chaos that he developed through things like he cut down, he was thinning plants in our kind of borrowed garden and then leaving them as nests for animals so that there would be something interesting for people to look at. And then we were very lucky to collaborate with Mike Tooby, the curator, who set up a relationship with the National Museum of Wales for us, so that they have very, very kindly lent paintings to us. So these are some examples: Mally Morris and Beda Williams. All of the rooms in the building have different work by different artists. We were looking for collaborations to make within the architecture. So we commissioned textile artist Linda Florence to make tiles that line the fireplace niche. Pat O'Leary made the ceramic sign at the entrance. And then we commissioned Lisa Kriegel, a ceramicist, to make all of the crockery and mugs so that people have something nice to hold when they're in the building. And Anthony Gormley made us a new edition of his bollards, which, and we knew we needed bollards. This is a tiny site in the middle of a car park, and we needed something to protect the building, but we were very, very pleased to have these ones that have a resonance with the material of the building. And so a series of drawings, the trees, the borrowed landscape of the neighbouring building, and our building tucked under those. The courtyard that you arrive in, as Alun described, the axial relationship along the building, and then the kitchen off which all the other spaces open, separated by the Douglas fir boxes. The design for the roof was generated by the idea of running it at 45 degrees to the building, to the arrival point of the building, so that it then makes an irregular canopy over it, which is punctuated just by the tall space of the couch with a roof light along the top of it. This is the outside of it, and you can see that the windows on the perimeter of the building are very small, but once you're inside and looking into garden spaces, there are very big expanses of glass and to bring light into the building. So this is the entrance courtyard and Cleve's drawing of the multi-stem plants in that space. Coming into the building and looking at the entrance, and then down into the main space of the building with the couch on your left, which is this sort of irregular form. The kitchen space with its view towards the garden. And then the canopy of the roof projects to make a sheltered space for if you're outside and it's raining. And then you can see that the roof has a very kind of lively relationship with the spaces and makes different types of, brings different character to the different rooms, which we've really enjoyed. This is the large meeting room that's used for all kinds of events. And then looking back towards the kitchen and the couch, the small rooms for consultation and different, more private meetings. Linda's tiles around the fireplace. And I think what we were really interested in was how to make the building a space you could navigate on your own. So it's very important to Maggie's brief that there aren't signs, that you can open and close doors and open and close windows. This is within the couch, which has the roof light above, but also a little window out to the garden with a shutter that you can close. And then we made a curtain out of a Welsh blanket, which is the door. And then there's a bench, so you could lie down and have a rest if you wanted to, and still hear the voices of people elsewhere in the building. If you look up, you see the roof light through this very tall space. And then this is a wonderful pairing of drawings by Sean Edwards, of joiner's marks, which Mike hung in this space. And then the courtyard, and looking towards the office. So remembering also that this is a building where people work all day. And just thinking about how we wanted to make a space where you could always see nature, you could always open and close a window and door, feel connected to the outside. And the office surveys the entrance, but it's separate. You can see people passing by, but you're not immediately on top of them. So trying to find a very comfortable relationship between the different spaces of the building. Thank you.
That's fabulous. Thank you very much. I got a couple of interesting comments which have actually come in on the chat function, and I would ask people please to ask your questions and make your comments on the presentation in the Q&A. But I think it's interesting that one of them, it's not a question, but I think we can turn it into one. They said, they love the asymmetry. It's a lot less formal than traditional form. And I know that you've talked about how the whole design evolved. And I wondered whether that asymmetry simply came out of the evolution of the design, or whether it was something you were specifically looking for.
It was a bit of both, really. I think one of the main things that what we were trying to do was make the building have the profile of a mountain range.
Yes.
But also, when you were within the building, we wanted the underside of that roof form to effectively draw you into the building and then propel you out to the trees and out to nature. So there was a very clear connection between entering the courtyard, going into the building, and being projected out into the garden. And so it's a very simple device. It's a pitched roof. The pitches are all the same, but they're just tilted at 45 degrees to the plan. So effectively, the roof is perpendicular to the garden at the back, and the building itself is perpendicular to the car park at the front. And so where those two geometries come together, you get that asymmetry. Obviously, we tweaked it and manipulated it. We made many models of it in order that we could, you know, push it and pull it to precisely what we thought was the best sort of coming together of all of those things.
But I think also there was an informality that we were looking for that's akin to the brief, which was about something asymmetrical and a bit unexpected and quirky.
Fantastic. I'm just going to ask you very quickly. I had another question coming in, and I'm sure that the quick answer to it is yes, but I'll give you a couple, let you have a couple of sentences, which is, have you done any post-occupancy evaluation and seen how people react to the building?
We go back quite often, and we're in contact with the staff who run the building all the time. We were there last week.
Yeah, yes. I mean, the informal feedback that we get from Maggie's is that it's hugely successful, and it's all very positive. So it's an interesting question whether Maggie's do their own analysis. I don't know, but the anecdotal evidence that we have from Maggie's is it's been a huge success.
Thank you very much to both of you.
Yes.
And we'll go on now to our next speaker, who is Ben Hancock, who is Managing Director of Oscar Acoustics. He's our second, but not our last Ben of the day. And he's going to be talking to us about the space of the future, and that in terms of acoustics. And I noticed that Ben Channon touched on acoustics and highlighted the importance of them. And I'm sure that this Ben is going to tell us a great deal more about that. So over to you.
I might mention acoustics at some point.
Yes.
Okay, I'll just share my screen.
That's it. Yep.
Okay, so you can see, yep, okay. So I'm Ben Hancock, Managing Director of a family-run company in its 42nd year now, called Oscar Acoustics. We specialise in spray-applied architectural acoustic finishes with a range of 5, from industrially textured to the smoothest acoustic plaster available, and everything in between. The photos you'll see are sort of a range of everything. In the background, just above me here, that's Gensler's headquarters in London, and they use the Sonespray K13 Special, which is kind of the second most textured finish. So to explain my title, Health, Wellbeing and Space Versatility, the key to the saleable workspace of the future. As much as I'd prefer never to mention COVID-19 again, it's going to affect the way we do things for this foreseeable future, and we would be short-sighted not to react. Before COVID-19 pandemic, millions of us lived the 9-to-5 lifestyle, working in the office, all happy. Numerous bullish commentators prophesied the end of the office, yet recent media stories look more nuanced. Many are tired of the endless Zoom calls, the difficulties remote working poses for collaboration on tasks, and the wider margin for misinterpretation through reliance on email or chat. They're longing for the unstructured face-to-face conversation or gossip, baking competitions, social events, and just a change of scenery. Many are also suffering with home working related issues, as Ben touched on, like a workspace that was not designed for its current use. For those not able to have a dedicated workstation due to cost or space, dining and coffee tables rarely give you the required ergonomics of their usual workspace, resulting in physical problems. According to a global study by Lenovo, 71% complain of new or worsening aches, pains while working remotely due to COVID-19, including back pain, neck pain, poor posture, headaches, difficulty sleeping, and eye strain. Likewise, worrying numbers are suffering with isolation-related mental health issues and not having a clear home-work divide with both time and location. As a result, they were keen to get back to the workplace, providing their employer could satisfy their concerns with COVID safety measures. That said, they were not looking forward to the lengthy commutes on crowded public transport or having difficulty concentrating due to excessively noisy workplace with no or insufficient acoustic treatment. It's clear that offices are going to have to be different post-COVID. For many businesses, their employees are keen for a blended arrangement with time at home and in the office. In fact, 3/4 of adults who are able to work from home remotely would like to do so at least once a week once the pandemic's under control. So with so many businesses struggling financially though, or just finding things are running well enough considering the huge saving on office overheads, this will invariably have a negative impact on building vacancy rates. With more office space empty, landlords are going to be competing for a smaller number of potential tenants, so the space needs to be as saleable as possible, and acoustics can play a big part in this. Those who've seen me present before may be aware of our Oscar Acoustics big workplace noise survey, where we polled 2,000 UK employees across a range of different sectors. With regards to the effect excessive noise had on their mental well-being and the serious unknown health issues that it can cause, like tinnitus, sleep disturbance, heart disease, obesity, diabetes, adverse birth outcomes, and cognitive impairment in children. So having discussed that recently at the RIBA offices webinar early in the year, I won't go into much detail about that, but you're able to see this again on the Oscar Acoustics YouTube channel. You can also find a summary of the findings on our website and LinkedIn blogs. And we're also probably going to release the entire survey spreadsheet as well. It's some really interesting stuff there. Sorry to Ruth here for the still. I found it actually impossible to get a still of a moving image, and both people look okay in here. So ways acoustic finishes can assist. Firstly, have an acoustic product installed throughout during the Cat A build. The Sone Spray range enables you to treat the original concrete slab, metal profile, rib deck or plasterboard with a through coloured decorative coating, giving you the maximum ceiling height and a sense of space. It's also extremely easy to do local hand repairs. A tennis ball sized piece of damage caused by a piece of conduit going up could be repaired in sort of around about a minute, invisibly as well. So it makes it a more pleasant and relaxing place in which to spend your working life. On a recent project in Glasgow, we were able to complete the spraying of an 8,000 square metre building in just under 6 weeks using multiple teams. The client loves it, and we're due to spray 2 more of their buildings early next year, one of which is 15,000 square metres and the other one's about the same as the one we've just done. Secondly, have an acoustic system in place that allows complete flexibility for the Cat B configuration and reconfiguration. These pod-like structures can be built and dismantled without affecting the Sone Spray above, allowing for reconfiguration when required, something we may see more of as we progress through the pandemic. Had a mesh top been used on this pod instead of a solid one, these pods would also have benefited from the acoustic performance of the Sone Spray above. As time goes on and more people want to return to the workplace, having a flexible workspace in which to easily reconfigure without repairs or ceiling grid alteration and tile replacement is invaluable. The same applies for companies designing their Cat B project from scratch. Just because this spaced out configuration is what's required at the moment doesn't mean it's going to be like it forever, we hope. So complete flexibility is key. The emissions of the products used in the build are also increasingly important, with more certification systems dedicating an entire section to it. So our Sone Spray range achieves the following for being classed as a low emitting building material, something very important in the Well Building Standard, which is gaining popularity. So it's M1 classified as a low emitting building material, which is the best achievable. It's compliant with the California Department of Health, Green Guard Gold certified for indoor air quality, the BREEAM rating as well, Environmental Product Declaration, which is ISO 14025, and also the LEED version as well. And as I do like to mention from time to time, Sauna Spray was used by Delos, the company that founded the World Building Standard, throughout their new HQ. The architects Gensler recommending the product to the client's specification team for its perfect fit with WELL's building standard. And as you'd expect, this building is built to the very highest standard of WELL and to achieve LEED V4 Platinum and Living Building Challenge certification. But this isn't enough in the modern world. A product must also boast environmental credentials, impressive environmental credentials. Sauna Spray Architectural Acoustic Finish is a high-grade recycled cellulose paper and specialist water-based adhesives, treated to achieve a Class O and B-S1D0 fire rating, providing a significant benefits over the new approved Document B requirements, providing little to no smoke and absolutely no droplets, assisting in the safe escape of occupants. The Sauna Spray range contributes towards many sustainable design certifications and systems, standards including BREEAM, LEED, SCAR, Living Building Challenge and Passive House. To complete the environmental set and make Sauna Spray the ultimate building material, Oscar Acoustics are currently going through the ISO 14001 accreditation process, which should be complete this month. But as a wise frog once says, it's not easy being green. The process has been eye-opening and it will require commitment from all our staff. But all very worth it, because it will enable one of our customers to gain an extra 5 BREEAM points towards their outstanding target. The range can also effectively lower the carbon footprint of a building by sequestering rich stores of carbon for the life of the structure or application, which is ideal for large companies trying to tackle their carbon footprint. JLL, environmentally, is another way in which vacancy rates can be reduced. This year, pre-COVID, JLL released a paper entitled Impact of Sustainability on Value, which highlights green offices are more likely to bring in a rent premium and less likely to sit empty. Buildings with BREEAM Very Good or higher certifications saw a rental premium of 8%. London developments with BREEAM Outstanding or Excellent ratings experienced vacancy rates of just 7% within 24 months of completion, in comparison to those rated Very Good, which recorded vacancy rates of 20%. I suggest that's going to be very different now. JLL's UK Head of Sustainability, Sophie Walker, said, the first developers to undertake the task will reap the rewards of high levels of demand and intrinsic high performance of their product. This opportunity to provide sustainability as a point of differentiation and to appeal to forward-thinking occupiers will really play out over the next decade. So with COVID-19 having changed our world so dramatically and so quickly, it's all the more important to stand out from the crowd with low-emitting building materials and carbon offsetting premises. And in years to come, when things start to settle down again, your flexible workspace will enable you to reconfigure with a minimum disruption. Unless you're all enjoying working from home, that is. So thank you very much for listening. If you'd like to know the full results of the workplace survey I mentioned, please either send me a LinkedIn invite to view our blogs, or you can find them on our website. You can follow us on Instagram, where we regularly post beautiful professional images of our work, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, where you'll find some great videos, including the new company video that we're very proud of. Many thanks.
Thanks very much, Ben. I hope in the interests of egalitarianism that next time you post a screenshot, we can have one of me looking wonderful and you looking awful. I think that's...
I wasn't happy with mine either. So
we've had a couple of questions, and I think there's one about fire, which I think you answered before it was asked. Also, there's a question about how you remove it at the end of the material, at the end of the lifespan of the building, and is it possible to recycle it? So I'll just punt that to you.
Okay, so removing it, yes, it's possible. It can be scraped off the surface. Whilst it's fairly tough to damage because it's a little bit spongy, actually with a scraper you can scrape it off fairly easily, which will then leave a bit of a residue, but if you then damp it, that residue wipes off very easily. If you've got a flat ceiling, which is concrete, you can actually use one of the flex drywall sanders with a coarse grit disc that takes it straight off very easy. Fire, mentioned that, yes, extremely good in a fire. We've got testing on our YouTube channel showing that actually where glass fibre is in a fire test alongside sauna spray, the glass fibre is starting to shower down about 700 to 800 degrees, whilst the sauna spray is still in place at nearing on 1,000 degrees and beyond. So for recycled paper, it's extremely impressive in a fire. The other question was recycling. Yes.
Yes.
Yes, it is possible to recycle. It's made of recycled paper anyway, as I say, but you just need to speak to your local authority on recycling and their rules. But yes, not a problem.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed. We're going to have a break in a moment, and I'll suggest to you how you deal with that. Since we've been talking a lot about places where people work, I thought I'd just do a shameless plug because I've been thinking about the subject a lot, and I've got a book coming out with Riba very, very shortly called New Workspace. I'm sure that Charmian will be more than happy to publish details about it in the chat. But what we're going to do now is we are going to break for about 10 minutes. If you could please not log out, not turn your computer off. If you could just, all of you, just go away for 10 minutes and do whatever you want to do. And then we will be back here at 10 past 10. Thank you very much. I'll see you shortly. Welcome back, everybody. And I must say, welcome back wherever you are, because we have seen people coming in here from most fantastic range of places. I think New Zealand is probably the furthest. We've had people in Australia, in Malaysia, in Hong Kong, in Latvia. But I think really the most impressive, and I hope you're still with us, but if you aren't, I do understand, are the people who joined from parts of America where it was 3 a.m. for them when they came in. I'm not sure how that actually deals with health and well-being for them, but we're delighted that so many people are attending, and do please keep watching because we have had some fantastic speakers and we have some more really good ones to come. We now have the third and last of our Bens, not the last of our speakers, and this is Ben Alun, founder of Studio Ben Alun, who as well as working with artists like Olafur Eliasson, also was the architect for the first European building to get the WELL building standard. So over to you. As always, you've got 20 minutes, but if you can cut it shorter, we can actually have some questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Right, I'm just going to share my screen and hopefully,
yeah,
can you see that?
That's there, yes, okay.
Great. Let me just start a timer so I can... so my name is Ben Alun, and I run Studio Ben Alun. It's a small architects practice based in East London. I founded it in 2014, and we undertake a range of projects from workplace projects, residential projects, and sort of arts and cultural projects. We also try and have a sort of focus on what we sort of call research, which is trying not only to obviously use our projects as a sort of vehicle for exploring new ideas, but to try and have sort of side researches, which, you know, areas of interest, which we sort of constantly develop. And whenever there's sort of occasional points of downtime, or often sort of researchers from one project will feed into another. So my background before setting up the practice, I worked as an architect in London for a number of years. And then I worked in the studio, as Ruth mentioned, of Olafur Eliasson in Berlin for almost a decade. And part of that sort of, I suppose, gives me interest in a sort of more maybe sensory approach to architecture. And obviously, Eliasson's work is very visually sort of stimulating, but also sort of trying to, there was a lot of focus on combined senses. This background of the project I'm going to talk about is a case study. We call it the Holistic Office. Now, I mean, it sounds like a bit of a brag, but in a way, this is a sort of, we do about one workplace project a year, so we're not sort of a major player in this area. At the beginning of my career, I worked on Vodafone's headquarters in Newbury, working with Fletcher Priest Architects, and the background to this project was that not long after starting my practice, we did some sort of space planning studies for Cundall engineers for their London office, and then their negotiation on the lease fell through, and we very quickly ended up designing an office for 200 people for them. And one of the initial pitches to them, it was at the same time as there was a lot of discourse about trying to move this. Can somebody explain to me why I can't move the slides? Oh, there you go, I just pressed it. A lot of discourse about sort of sitting being the new cancer or the new smoking, and this sort of sedentary lifestyle and how negative it was on our health. And so this was one of the things that we were discussing, and the well standard came up as an interesting idea. It was relatively new at that point. Nobody in Europe had signed up for it. There was a few sort of test projects. So we sort of threw ourselves in to do that. And it was quite a challenge. That it was the first workplace project we'd undertaken as practice, small team. I was the only person with workplace experience. It was actually very, very fulfilling. And although the well standard is, I wouldn't say, it's flawless. I think like any certification, there are challenges. And I think as these things go on, they become, actually, one of the problems in a way is it becomes easier to fulfill the requirements. And actually, I think part of the reason for having these is that certifications is that it's sort of pushing people to kind of further. And I think particularly in something like the workplace sector, it's very easy for everyone to sort of pat each other on the back and say, oh, we're doing so well. And as Ben Shannon's talk earlier was sort of outlining, I mean, so a lot of the numbers, particularly in terms of mental well-being, are saying anything but that. And coming from an outsider, relatively, having sort of really spent most of my career working in other fields, I was sort of very aware of this. Most workplaces still look like factories. They're arranged like factories, and even all the servicing and everything, it's treated very much in the same way. And so I think this is actually a major challenge. And I think in architecture, there is, I think at times, particularly in some of the sort of fit out sectors, maybe a bit, too much self-congratulation. And I think that, so the office, the project I'm going to show you, 15 Collimore Row in Birmingham, which was a later project for Cundall, this is by no means has all the answers, but it was, again, more of an exploration of a number of ideas which we'd started in the London project. So the London project was the first project to get the WELL standard certification in Europe, and it was only the 7th globally, so it was a relatively new standard when we did it. The Birmingham office was an interesting challenge because it was they were expanding, taking over another floor, one floor above the existing floor, and then they asked us at the same time to reconsider some of the spaces. So this was their existing 4th floor of its early 80s office building in Birmingham, and they were asking us to look at expanding it, but also reconfiguring some of the spaces. So we created a new kind of town hall space, a sort of central meeting space and cafe, and they asked us also to make this well compliant, and it was recently awarded well gold. So I'll take you through some images of this. This is the new upper floor. And the space itself was relatively, it has windows on both sides, has good daylight, it's not overlooked. So it was, and they already had exposed services on the lower floor. So those all kind of helped. sort of, you know, compared to the London office, which was very, very deep floor plate, in some ways the starting point was really, in some ways, more positive. These are the kind of main areas for the accreditation for the WELL building standard: air, water, nourishment, light, fitness, comfort, and mind. And there's quite a lot of overlap on these, and some relate more to the architect, some relate more to the sort of service engineering. Air, you know, a large part of this is to do with service engineering, and providing and putting back, you know, high quality filters in to make sure the air quality is of a sufficient standard. Sadly, in a lot of our urban environments, opening the windows isn't actually beneficial in terms of getting the best air quality. Although, you know, we're actually currently working on another office for Cundall in Dublin, which is in a Victorian building, and we're naturally ventilating it, which is really, in some ways, much more sort of, it ticks a lot of WELL standard boxes. It's the external air quality is relatively good, and it's in a not overly congested part of the city. This slide is mainly about materials. That's one of the biggest challenges we had when we did the London office. It's a little bit easier now. It's mostly about VOCs, volatile organic compounds, and to comply with the WELL standard, there are various different technical certifications for different materials, but in general, you're looking at either 0 VOCs or ultra low VOC levels. So that does sort of mean that you know, everything needs to be checked. It's more companies now have WELL certification information, so they can tell you how it's been measured. So it is easier than it was. But for us, it was also a nice opportunity to use materials we love, which is like things like natural wood, and also to try and sort of simplify the method of you know, what you use, less sort of composite materials, and it sort of goes along a little bit with the practice ethos, which is that trying to make spaces, you know, trying to use materials that people understand what they are. So yeah, most people, when they see wood, they react in a certain way to it. They understand what it is. It has nice texture, and mentioned earlier, tactile materials. We very much like things that don't look like they've been designed to be sort of scrubbed down. So materials that sort of get better with age, which in some ways we sort of managed to find, you know, some nice sort of palette of materials, some of which we developed for the London project, and we have sort of expanded on in this project. Velcromat was another material, 3-color fiberboard, which performs very well. Ortex is an acoustic felt, which is another great material, and it has a nice, very visual sort of matte, you know, tactile quality. And then Cradrite textiles we used as well. So this was an artwork behind the reception, which we designed, which we were keen to kind of make it sort of almost part of the work. You know, that people can really understand, the people that work there understand and enjoy what the materials are. So it's a nice opportunity to use them in this kind of context. Water and nourishment, again, there's some quite sophisticated filtration systems they put in. In this case, one of the things just touching on is hygiene, and they have in the WELL standards, they had something which I always thought was a little bit more, maybe should be designed for kitchens and things, which is there's a distance between the spout and the bottom of the sink of 25 centimeters. And it was always sort of one of these things that, you know, it's relatively easy to do, but it was sort of, you know, we were sort of, it was a bit of an oddity in the times of COVID when everyone's washing their hands all the time. It's actually interesting how many wash basins and sinks don't really have space to get your hands in properly without kind of touching everything around the sink. So it's actually interesting that these things, you know, that you can sort of see why they have these things. And nourishment, in one of the main things here is actually they ask for 30% of the staff to be able to sit down at any one time somewhere in the office to eat their dinner. This is something which, particularly in London, having worked on the continent for a decade, the idea of sitting at your desk and eating, I mean, it's generally seen as being unhygienic. And what's interesting is one of the sort of side consequences is actually what they found in their London office is almost sort of peer pressure to be more healthy. When everyone sits together and eats, people tend to eat more healthily. So in this case, we provided enough space for 50% of people to sit down at any one time. and that sort of creates a town hall space. These spaces actually, because the kitchen is almost designed a bit like a sort of cafe, become very popular, you know, spaces just to hang out generally. And following from the London office, because when we designed the London office, we actually found it difficult to get furniture, which is well compliant. Now there's a lot more companies. We designed our own cafe tables and benches. So because they were very popular and they liked them, we followed here. Fitness, again, there's you know, some things which sort of are really outside the architect's remit, but the client basically made sure there was plenty of space for cycle parking. There were already showers which were upgraded, so people could run in the morning, jog home in the evening. Storage for sports kit was a key one. One of the main sort of central focal points was the staircase linking the two floors. And so we sort of made this almost sort of, you know, the unifier of the office. You know, architecturally, it seemed like a nice way of also trying to create visual links between the upper and the lower floor. So we designed a staircase which was made out of birch plywood, and also because they're engineers, they have a structural engineering team, it was a nice opportunity to lay them a challenge to help us design and engineer this staircase, which would obviously, you know, encouraging people. There's a lift and a separate staircase elsewhere, but this was the sort of central stair, which are trying to encourage people to be more active. So you can see here we had a bit of fun with it, and yeah, it really sort of ties the whole office together, the upper floor and the lower floor. One of the interesting things is there was a lot of pushback on having only one central kitchen. There's a sort of strong culture that every small area of the office should have a sort of kitchenette. And we sort of felt that it was better to have, for a company of this size, and even in the London office, one central space that was really well kitted out, that people could make lunch, but there's lots of variety of drinks, more healthy options than the sort of more standard idea of a sort of tea kitchen where everyone just drinks huge amounts of tea and coffee. So, and also the fact that it would encourage people to come up and down between the two spaces. And likewise, we tried to put some of the breakout spaces on the upper level to encourage, because the lower level was the entrance level, to encourage people to use both floors and people to move around a lot between the different spaces. So here we go, some more pictures of the staircase. I just sort of flick through these. And then the other one was sort of agile working. And this is a really interesting challenge. And I mean, having worked in the art world, you know, we had really nice, decent sized desks for each person, which we built ourselves. And what's interesting, you know, I'm sort of really into the idea of a desk as a great workspace and something that encourages you to work, and sort of something that's fit for purpose. I think there's a slightly disingenuous approach to work that, particularly if you look at a lot of offices, you know, that are published in the media, it's very difficult to find any evidence of desks. There's a lot of people sitting on iPads next to sort of water features, and really, I think this is important. One of the things in this case, they had existing desks, more or less enough for the new space as well, because they were sort of spreading the desks out, and sorry, we just moved on to another section, but we're quite interested in high level working. So the idea of, if you go to Scandinavia, you see this quite a lot, having a high chair, which is often a bit like a sort of draftsman's chair, and sort of fixed high desks. And actually what's interesting about this is it actually allows much easier, instead of sort of having to have like an hour in the afternoon where you stand at your desk, and I'm old enough to remember working on a drawing board, you sort of don't really notice if you're standing, perching on your chair or sitting. And high chairs are very good because they have a footrail. They actually encourage you to sit up straight, just by the nature of the way they're designed. And actually what's also interesting is that, you know, we're sort of quite critical of a lot of the ergonomic chairs. We looked into, you know, exactly how they qualify to be ergonomic, and generally it seems like there's sort of more sort of self-certification that you know go through a certain process. The Aeron chair, which is sort of much used in a lot of offices, was originally designed because they were looking at old people's homes and designing a chair that you could sit in for sort of 12 to 14 hours a day with very little movement, which is actually almost the wrong, in my mind, is the opposite way we should be going. We should be designing chairs that encourage people to not sit for hours and hours at a time. So this is our high desk, which is a sort of breakout space, and they use it for, people can come and work here. Talk about light, so the space, we had good natural light. The previous slide, I don't know if I can go back. Oh no, it only goes forward. But we played around with the staircase and lighting, so we actually sort of almost made a mini artwork above the staircase where there's a sort of disc of lights, and as the light during the day changes outside, the staircase is in the central part of the building, the lights come from different angles. So we wanted to kind of, and this almost comes on to sort of mind and comfort in any case, try and, one of the things is light changing throughout the course of the day. And one of my pet bugbears is, a lot of office buildings have big grids of grills on the outside to try and stop light coming in. And it's done for very good reasons, overheating, light on the screens, but it comes at a drawback, which is that, trying to keep light out of buildings to me seems like an anathema. And as people have mentioned, one of the main things people are enjoying about working from home is natural light coming in and the play of light around a room, and even the fact that you realize that the time of day is changing, because in the morning the lights on one wall and in the afternoon the lights on another wall. Comfort, these two, I've sort of lumped some of these topics together, but this is almost one of the most interesting, and we're running a bit short on time, but comfort's a challenging one for architects. If you put sofas in spaces, they tend to not get in workplaces, they tend to not get used very much, we found, unless there's a strong culture of that. I think the sort of general air quality, light, comfort, also ability to change things. So the lighting, we had task lighting, up down lighting on the desks on the upper floor, which are user controlled. In terms of mind, this is one which I think is most interesting, and maybe I'll sort of use this to sort of summarize. This is sort of excerpts about biophilia. And in the London office, we didn't go into such detail on this. In the Birmingham office, we did. And it was actually a very interesting, I'm sort of cynical of the approach to biophilia, which is, it's great if you put a picture of a tree on the wall, it makes everyone happy, because I think trying to sort of trick the system is always quite dangerous. But I think there is a lot of these things which are interesting, and also ways to sort of justify what you're doing, and to try and kind of create a new level of thoughtfulness about internal views as well as external views. And in this office, we try to put all the planting along the perimeter walls. A lot of people sort of put it in the center of the office because they sort of, there's this sort of dead space in the middle and they want to cheer it up. And we were actually thinking, well, not only is it better for plants, but light reflecting on plants is something which I think is very important. And again, this idea of light changing during the course of the day. And then there's a couple more things which I flick through. This slide, sort of, we built this shelving system. We used it in London as well. We sort of modified it a bit here, but trying to create sort of rooms within rooms, the idea of refuge space. And one of the big challenges of open plan spaces is a lot of people don't like open plan working. Interestingly, when we interview people, a lot of the younger staff don't like it. They feel quite intimidated. They feel everyone's looking at their screens, and they actually want privacy and somewhere, that's maybe less sort of out in the open space. Partly that also comes to the fact there's often a hierarchy, that senior people get the nice space by the window and junior staff get the space that's everyone walks past their desk when they walk in. So the idea of refuge, I think, is very important. Again, tactile materials. We developed this sort of acoustic ceiling with Ortex. It's a sort of ceiling grids. We want to sort of create some interesting geometry. And the other one is, when it comes back to the staircase, is visual interest. And again, I'm sort of really passionate about the idea of, if you go into the natural environment, it's incredible. If you look at, if you're walking through a woodland, you are seeing, unbelievably, high numbers of different objects moving around constantly, with the light changing constantly. And
I'm going to have to ask you to wind this up, because you've gone through your question session and
sorry.
Section, I'm afraid.
Right, I've got 20 minutes, so yes, okay. Well, that was the end of the thing. Anyway.
Okay, well, so listen, thank you really very much for that. It's been really interesting, and I'm not going to have time to put questions to you, but there are some really interesting questions that have come in on the Q&A, and I've seen the earlier presenters have responded to questions on the Q&A, and I think if you can do that as well, that will be useful not just to the people who've asked the questions, but also to the audience in general, who will be able to see that. So I'm sorry to have stopped you there, but it was a fabulous presentation. I'm not quite sure why you never entered it for the Wood Awards, but maybe there's next year. And thank you very much. And we're going to move on to our next speaker now, who is Debbie Bathurst-Elliott of Studio BE, who, yeah, there you are. And she's going to be talking to us about inclusive design for wellbeing. And I'll hand over to you now. Thanks very much, Debbie.
Hello, hi. Just sharing the screen.
Not seeing it yet.
See the screen okay?
Hi Debbie, you're not sharing your screen yet. The big green button and then then desktop.
Just one sec, let me do it. Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's it.
There we go.
Yeah.
If you go full screen now, then we should see everything.
Okay, apologies. Hi, I'm Debbie Bathurst-Elliott, sustainable architect based in Stroud. Throughout my architectural training, I've sought to minimise the impact of the, reduce the impact of the built environment on human and planetary health. I've launched a chartered practice in Stroud, Gloucestershire, and we take a fabric-first holistic approach to building design with a focus on health and well-being. I'm presenting our recently delivered project in Cheltenham, St Stephen's Manor in Cheltenham. We were originally introduced to the project through the RIBA, and the client was looking for an architect to design accessible living accommodation for his wife, who suffers with motor neurons disease, MND. I felt confident I could support them through the process, having worked previously for the seminal architect Christopher Day, who also suffered with this condition in a huge influence from the beginning of my education, and I went straight. I used to carry his book in my bag at university and went straight down to work for him, having finished my degree. He wrote many books, including Places of the Soul, which focuses on architecture as a healing art, and it's been very influential, particularly in the early days when these kind of topics, health and well-being, were not really part of the architectural language. The clients, Joe and Kathy, approached the project with an open mind, and were a pleasure to work with from inception through to the completion of the works on site. Albeit Kathy was unable to communicate verbally throughout the process, we still found a way together to unfold her aspirations into the process. Having carefully listened to the client, we responded on the site, we responded with a contemporary, healthy building design. As architects, we are all now well aware of both the aspects of health combined with well-being and sustainability. We have all heard of Passive House and the benefits of taking this approach. As a practice, we also seek to integrate the science of building biology into our design process, which is an approach to design which promotes human health while still enabling us to create examples of healthy and inclusive architecture. By incorporating these concepts, we can offer new insights into the way we design the built environment. How design could enhance well-being while still being adaptable and a safe environment for Kathy to manoeuvre around. Such concepts can include bringing the outside views in, maximising the use of natural daylight, and the use of spatial proportions which enhance the quality of life. With reference to considering the balance, the occupants and the built environment, there are a number of identifiable factors we can consider within the design process. The chart, as indicated on the slide, has been extracted from Nigel Acey's book on building biology, and it starts to identify such factors. I've just considered for clarity one element, which each of the X and Y basically give us the same wording, but it's how each decision responds to the built environment, but also the health of the occupant. So, for example, by thinking about using moisture diffusion and humidity regulating materials, we can start to address factors such as creating a healthier indoor environment, reducing interstitial condensation, and reducing building fabric failure. The client has said that adopting such taking such a design approach has really helped Kathy to safely live her life with greater dignity and safety, which is another key factor in an inclusive design. And for example, Kathy is now able to sit at her own dressing table, and part of her daily ritual includes spending time by herself at her naturally daylit dressing table while enjoying the view outdoors. The inclusive design is also a response to the feedback working with the OT throughout the process, the occupational therapist. Feedback included concerns that the OT had over the clerestory window, the structural stability of the clerestory, being able to accommodate the hoist that Kathy will be needing. But we were able to work with the structural engineer to ensure that that was allowed for certain things like recommendations for non-carpeted surfaces, automatic washer dryer to help make life easier for them both. And she felt happy that the design would spatially accommodate Kathy's manoeuvrability, both indoor and outdoor. So just having a look at the building biology approach, within the science, they've identified 25 key principles. I've managed to, we highlighted 12 here, such as supplying sufficient fresh air, striving for a well-balanced ratio between indoor surface and outdoor, using humidity buffering materials, nurturing the sensory perceptions of space and touch, maximizing natural daylight, avoiding environmental harm, and conserving natural resources. And it should go without saying that we highlight the enjoyment of the views outside and live in and with nature, but to also live with neighbours and surroundings. So to the north, we created an extension an outdoor living area offering a little sanctuary for both Joe and Kathy. He's enjoyed socially distant visits from friends, and the overhang is clad with timber offering shelter, LED lighting offering shelter, and a year-round outdoor space. So yeah, I mean, this is the final slide. If you reading the building biology book by Nurjot Asi, and take a look at the buildingbiology.com website, which has been translated from German for the UK. So thank you for listening.
Thank you very much indeed. I suppose one of the questions really with a project like that is that you're having to design it very much for the needs of the particular needs of the client, and have a building that's going to work very well later on when she's no longer there, and presumably when the house may well be sold on to someone else without those particular needs. I don't know if there's anything you want to say about that.
Well, I think it wasn't something that we discussed particularly as part of the brief, but obviously as taking responsibility for the long-term built environment, it's certainly a space that could be accommodated very well for a variety of families' needs. But one thing that we did make sure was that within the bathroom, the wet room, we didn't put in too many handrails and went overboard with that. So it's a very nice space. It's an adaptable space basically. So as and when her needs change, that the space can adapt to suit.
Thank you very much indeed. We're going to move on to our next speaker now, who is Diba Salam, who's principal and founder of Studio DS. And I think it's really interesting that one or two people have talked about things which are measurable, rather than us all sort of waving our hands around and saying, oh, well, it's nice to do this and nice to do that. And so I think Diba's presentation, which will be about using technology to capture health and well-being during the creative process, should really be very enlightening. So there's Diba's screen.
I've got two screens actually. Hello.
Hello.
So what I should have two screens. The one should show my face, and the other one
yeah. We
sharing
can
my
see
screen.
your face. We can see your face as well. Yes.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, that's fantastic.
Okay.
Well, should I go?
So it's over to you. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. Well, good morning, everyone. I think we're still in the morning, it's very nice. I mean, there's been some fantastic talks that we've been listening to. What I'll be sharing for you today as principal and founder of Studio DS, we're a London-based architectural creative agency with offices in Dubai and Bangkok. But what we're going to be sharing today is how we've used and why we've used technology to really enhance and enrich our creative process, with a particular emphasis, of course, on health and well-being within the creative process. I mean, starting a practice is, let's get this thing moving. Starting a practice is challenging. And one of the key things that I really wanted to focus on, I had a couple of years where I was working as a lead design consultant on various projects, but it allowed me time to really think about how did I want to inform the practice that I would create. And what was fundamental to me is that I had to react to some really quite challenging societal issues that we as a population, as humans, are facing. And looking at the UN Sustainable Development Goals number 11, we really made a commitment to reduce carbon emissions and to make a better quality of life and enhance communities. But really the population shifts that the UN were documenting at the time really did lead us to Asia. And being able to, and so one of the projects that I'm going to be sharing with you today is a project we've done in Phuket in Thailand, and hopefully that will enlighten you with the challenges of using technology as well. But we always start, we've always started with the design philosophy, you know, and every creative process doesn't matter whether it's a R&D project or a large scale project. We had to stay true to why were we doing this? And effectively, you know, what we were looking to do is to create, you know, sustainable, smart designs, which were effective, efficient and adaptable. And the particular area that we're obviously talking about today is health and well-being. And keeping the language very simple, that, you know, at the end of the day, we want to be around spaces and designs which really, you know, inspire us and has a positive impact on countries and societies and the communities it serves. And one of the key areas of the reason why we look at smart design, the smart design isn't just about technology, it's about how we get to that point. It was really to understand how do we develop the programs for them. I mean, I should say the studio was set up initially as an R&D tool, a vehicle for myself while I was working for other practices, so that I could really pursue challenges that we were facing as a profession and start to analyze other industries as well, whether it be the film industry, automotive industries. So it was always a vehicle that R&D was going to be very, very important. So if we start by looking at the creative brief, the reason why we call ourselves an architectural creative agency is because if you look at the way in which the architect's role has fragmented over many, many years, it's disappointing, and it's opened up many challenges which we can see in our current issues today in this country. But the international market, when they look at an architect, they're looking at a creative team, and the ideas and how do we get to those ideas and realize them is hugely important. So we always start by obviously the project discovery, strategic briefing, but storytelling, and breaking down all these different aspects, because we got to a point where we thought, actually, we're doing a lot of other people's work as well. So it's probably better for us to structure our services to reflect the type of product we want to produce. And this does differ for different projects, but this is very much looking at an international project. So as I said, research and development is hugely important to us, and that is actually how we've been able to really analyze technology and how it would be able to facilitate various parts of the research that we were looking at. So right from day one, before I'd taken on any staff, before I had to establish a budget, and the key aspects that I was looking at was obviously building information modeling and the virtual environment. But then looking at that model and how we can use that model for a whole host of different aspects. And I think the really challenging issue is how do you, there's so many softwares out there, how do you make that work? So that was a research project in itself. How do we communicate our ideas in the traditional sense, but also enhancing the future of, the way in which we communicate amongst people? And especially when you look in lockdown, it's very much about how everything is almost virtual now, even the way in which we're talking today. So a key aspect of our research as well was on architecture and neuroscience. And we have been looking at collaborating with other academic institutions and establishing how, throughout the creative process, how do we monitor health and well-being? And as a hypothesis, it was, okay, you have that, but then how do you get there? Had to involve, how do you even set up the company, and how do you invest in the right technology? And there was a lot of trial and error. But hopefully this presentation will share how we've navigated that. So the project that we were working on at the time, well, I should say I was working with the concept designer that we were sub-consultants to, and the client brought us in as the lead design consultant to delivery. So the client was very familiar with me as an individual, and I was able to share all these different ideas and philosophies and really talk about how I wanted to run my practice. And what that led to then, and I'd only had one employee at the time, the client was convinced that we would be really good for their next luxury development, which was in Phuket. And obviously I was a bit nervous, thinking, hang on a second, I've just set up my company. I don't think this is a good idea, because they wanted us to do the master planning, architecture and interior design. So they wanted us to do the full creative delivery. And it wouldn't just be for a design, it would be right to occupation of the facilities. So the project I'm sharing with you is it's a beautiful project in Phuket. It's lovely. It's one of the largest tourist destinations in the world. It's a hugely beautiful location. The client and the team, though, were not. They all spoke English, but there was a lot. Everything, all the engineers, all the teams, all the contractors, everyone had to be Thai, and that in itself poses a lot of challenges. So the first thing we always start with is storytelling and brand DNA. And that really did set the foundations of how we wanted to communicate with the teams. And so through using evocative images and evocative words, we kept the language very simple, but we were able, in a very sophisticated way, looking at competition, benchmarking, SWOT analysis. And so we were engaging with more than just the design teams. We were engaging with all the commercial teams across the whole commercial team. So this is how we start all projects, and really it's the bedrock of how we have the confidence then to be able to talk to all the stakeholders, right till the operational teams. And I think that's a key thing which we'll come to right at the end. So the creative process, which you're all very well aware of, the RIBA plan of works. We've almost created a kaleidoscope kind of diagram, where we implement very important processes that need to happen. Now, of course, the international design stages are very different. Well, they're not very different, they're similar, but they don't use the same terminology. And they generally go with 4 stages. What is very useful with the RIBA plan of works is that it breaks it down into more stages, so that you can they can be a very clear definition of what should be delivered at each stage. And it allows all the team members to understand then, well, you can't expect to get X, at that stage, wait a little long. So of course, that's another talk altogether. But what it allowed us to do is, say, for example, right from the conceptual stage, from a traditional sense of how people use 3D modeling, you use it from your sketches to your massing in a very organic way. So it goes back and forth, so you can test the design. And the design for us, as you can see from the brand DNA, had to really be inspired by the topology and the landscape, the nature in Phuket. So everything around, in terms of the geometry, was inspired by folding leaves. Those leaves would then, in turn, be able to provide shading and protection from the rain. So they could be, everything had to be integrated, and that was very important as part of our design philosophy. And we had a series of connecting bridges. But what you can start reading from this now is these are traditional computer aided design CGIs, which capture the vision of what we were trying to produce. And as you can see, it was a full district. It was a new district with 3 different sites. We were involved in phase 1 for a new retail mall and theme park with landscape bridges connecting all 3 sites. Now, from that 3D model, you can effectively, it's about what you can extract. So of course, Traditionally, you extract all the environmental analysis, and you can back up all your ideas with how what you're trying to introduce in terms of the design is backed up by actual data. And this is the key thing to look at with the type of technology that you're investing in. So so this is just a few images of the landscape bridges, the entrances, and this is a typical diagram of what you can expect from implementing a BIM model. So you can extract your visualizations, you can extract your elevations, and you can extract sections and so forth. But what you can also extract from that is, and this is where our architecture and neuroscience program came into play, was, sorry, these are models as well that you can create from those data. So what I'm trying to share is, if you invest in the right processes at the right stages with a model, there's a whole host of different things you can do. Now, what we keep as a running constant with all our projects, we work completely in a 3D environment. But what we also do is maintain an internal and external 3D rendered model of the entire project. So because we were doing the architecture, interior design and everything, this is an example of what the key area where we really wanted to bring people together. And one of the key design components of this was to bring the landscape inside the building. Traditionally, with a lot of retail malls, you block out a lot of the outside. What we wanted to do is open up views and bring the outside in and the inside out. So this is a snapshot of one of our animations. And we were able to create these animations and send them across to various, whether they were Louis Vuitton or Hermes, or local traders, where we really wanted to promote the concept of locality and create a sense of ownership with the local artists and, of course, the local people who would be using this site. So that led us to, how do we use that data now to create an easily understandable graphical form that shared, say, for example, users' experience. So it wasn't just the locals who would be using this retail mall, it would also be tourists, different types of tourists, like families or couples or single people. And how would people respond to these spaces? And so what we did, we created a series of routes, virtual routes, and created a series of questions which would track people's emotional responses to the spaces. Now, we did this throughout the creative process in stages. So it wasn't something, so first of all, we started with light and shadow. Now, how do you respond to the light and the volume of space through here? And as you can see, this is a more developed right at the end stages where we wanted to capture this. And what's really helpful with that type of study was how people on the team could really, you started to bring data into the design process. So rather than it being a discussion, oh, I think this would be a really nice idea. Well, actually, rather than having someone just fill out a form, you could say, well, actually, this is, look at how you have responded initially to this space. And so the whole concept of prototyping before you build a design, which is hugely expensive, enter into the virtual model where everyone can be invested in. And though we had a very local team, many of the contractors didn't understand English. So what was very important for us is how we communicated our ideas. But also, there's a huge list of tenants. So how people in New York or Tokyo or Paris would be responding to, well, this is the space that we would like to give you. So it became a hugely important tool, but a hugely important tool for us to really, say, for example, with this particular space, to create a certain volume and the way in which we wanted landscape to feature here. But what was very interesting with having that discussion in itself was to be able to listen to a lot of the operational teams and say, well, what are, of course, what are your needs? So from the same model, we have all the technical data, which you would expect from architects. But what we were able to have discussions with about construction, but also on day one, the team said to us, right, can we not put all the greenery in on day one? Can we do it through phases so that we can plan our budgets? But we all know what we're expected to do. So it's not just the construction teams who knew, okay, I've got to put some plants down here. It was also the operational teams. And that was really important for everyone to buy into that DNA where we always start at. So that, say for example, this is the first mall in the to implement single-use plastics. Now that dialogue would never have come about if we didn't, right at the day one, start talking about legacy. What is your brand DNA? What legacy do you want to leave with this project? And it allowed everyone to have that sense of ownership. And I think for the first time, Louis Vuitton basically used local artists along with their designers in Paris to really create an environment that was appropriate for Phuket and have a resort feel. And I don't think any of those discussions and any of those achievements would have been possible if we hadn't gone down the route of using technology and employing it in a very structured way through the creative process, through using, as I discussed, the RIBA plan of works. And I think what's very important as well, I mean, this is probably a much larger discussion, is how do architects manage that? How do architects sell that? And how to be more commercially savvy in being able to employ it. But for us, in terms of our health and well-being, we felt very happy that we were able to implement our research on a project that has largely been, it's gone through a lot of changes, but the design was always able to adapt to those changes. And ultimately the people who work there, the people who are using it are very happy, which is ultimately what makes us most satisfied. So we were meant to go back this year, and obviously the big elephant in the room, COVID, has stopped us from doing that, because stage 2 of our monitoring people's emotional responses through the virtual world, there was to monitor their responses through brain mapping as they're walking through the retail mall. We haven't been able to do that yet. We hope to do that soon and to take some proper photography. But it's been an exciting project, and I think the key thing for us is because we established those principles and values for all our projects, we were able to employ our research within the project, and that's hopefully something we want to develop more so. I don't know my timings, Ruth, but
I've let you go way over. We had a request from someone who said, please let her go on. So because we started early, I've let you go on, but I think we ought to stop now.
Okay, yeah, no, I've finished, so
great.
Over to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much. I've had some questions come in. I'll ask you a couple of them together. One of them is asking you what software you use for the 3D design. And another one is saying, just a quick question about the maintenance aspect when considering the outdoor plants and trees in the building design.
Sure. From the software point of view, I think what's really quite challenging for a lot of architects is once they buy a software, they feel they have to stick to that. Now we had a full BIM model and we used Revit to create that, all the plan sections, elevations. But the geometry was created in Rhino. And so for the complex geometry, we use Rhino and we use Grasshopper. And we do use a lot of different programs to make sure that we can communicate. So we're not driven by the software. We're driven by what software works for us, because at the end of the day, it's just a tool. For all the still images, because Revit and 3D Max is part of the Autodesk family, we were able to, we did outsource the actual CGIs with a lovely guy called Chris Wadsworth. And with the animations and all the full 3D animated models, we did that with Lumion. And as technology and as softwares improve, it becomes more realistic for architects to take back some of the grounds that we've lost and communicate in an effective way. The second question you asked was about maintenance with the plants, and so in Phuket, if you just put a bit of soil on your hands, you'll just literally grow a plant. I mean, it's very, very lush environment. So outside, what we always said to everyone is just, you've got all the plants here, let's just use whatever we've got in Phuket, so it will always flourish. The internal plants was the more challenging one. And what we basically compromised on, and this is why it's so important to have discussions with the operational teams, there were very good local traders who did artificial plants, but the ones that were closer to people, but not too close that it would the people could damage it, they would be real plants. So you would get the smells and the aroma of the natural plants, but it was a combination of both. Because as Ben number one, I'm going to call him, I can't remember his surname. We spend 90% of our time indoors. Yeah. And the only way, and greenery is hugely important to our health and well-being. And so even if it is artificial, it's fine.
That's great. Now, I must apologize to you because actually there were some really interesting questions, but I didn't get to them because my computer froze for a moment and I couldn't see them. And we're sort of out of time. So I'm just going to say that there are questions on issues like, you know, who owns the neurological data? Do you model things like smell and touch? Do you know, with your modelling of thermal and comfort performance, do you know if it reflects the haptic experience of being in the building? Now, unfortunately, we haven't got time for you to answer those here, but I think they are really interesting questions. So if you would like to go into the Q&A, you can actually put answers to those questions down and share them with all of our audience. But as I said, I'm going to have to stop you now because it is time to go on to our next speaker. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
And we're now going on to our last speaker, who is Danny Greco, who is Business Development Southern Regional Manager at Kingspan. And he's going to talk about the interrelationship between insulation specification and natural light levels. So
thank you, Ruth.
Over to you, Danny.
Share the screen and get the technology working.
Right.
Hopefully, we know how this works. Okay, so I'm hoping.
Yeah, it's there.
That it should be there, and I think it might just be. I didn't know if the black border was showing this that was showing earlier.
I can't see a black border.
Great.
Should I?
Okay. If you can't see it, then that's fantastic because it was just showing earlier on, but we'll make a start.
Okay.
Yeah, it looks good from our end, Danny. No problem.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you. Okay, right. So yes, thank you very much. My name is Danny Greco. I'm the Southern Regional Business Development Manager for Kingspan Insulation. My primary job is assisting architects and designers with their projects, so insulation specification for the whole building envelope. I'm here today to talk about daylighting and how insulation can perhaps impact natural light levels. Hopefully the slide will move on to the next one because that's usually the other thing if the slides move on. Just thinking about it. There we go. Okay. So access to natural light can have a profound impact on people's health and well-being. As we head towards the end of the year, many people, whether they're working from home or in a workplace, will start their day before sunrise and finish after sunset. This means that it is important that all buildings are designed around principles of good daylighting. When we think about natural light provision, the focus is often around fenestration or shading. However, to get optimal results, it's important to adopt a holistic approach. One area which can often be overlooked is the impact of wall thickness on the dispersion of natural light. Now more than ever, insulation is a key determining factor in how thick constructions will be. So important to take that into account. In this talk, we'll take a little look at how daylighting can influence the health and well-being of occupants and how we define good quality daylighting. We'll then just have a brief look at some research that's been done by Putz BV, not too sure if that pronunciation's right, considering how insulation specification can impact daylighting levels. So how does natural light affect health? Natural light plays a vital role in regulating our sleep-wake cycle, which is also known as a circadian rhythm. And this keeps us more active and alert during daylight and tiring sleep better as it gets dark. Even the slightest change to this pattern can have a substantial impact on how well we're able to sleep, our mood, and our overall well-being. People on average spend around 90% of their day indoors, so good daylighting provision is crucial. An example I've read is that staff in offices with no natural daylight have been shown to sleep on average 46 minutes less than their light receiving counterparts. So research has shown that health and well-being benefits associated with increased exposure to natural light can include reduced symptoms of seasonal affective disorder, such as depression, low energy, tiredness, increased appetite and weight gain, maintenance of healthy levels of vitamin D, which of course is positively linked to healthy bones, reduced amounts of bacteria and viruses associated with respiratory infections common in winter, and a positive impact on mood for those who spend a lot of time indoors. In order to deliver those health benefits, it's important to have a clear idea of what good quality daylighting actually means. EN 17037 provides a useful guide. This is a harmonised European standard which deals exclusively with how daylighting is designed and implemented. The standard highlights 4 key design considerations. So view out of windows, which is an assessment of the quality of the view for occupants, including factors such as the distance to the furthest construction and the number of layers visible. Access to sunlight, which recommends minimum sunlight exposure for occupants of 1.5 hours, along with measures to prevent hot spots and overheating. Prevention of glare, considering what percentage of occupants are likely to be impacted by glare and setting limits on this to ensure comfort. And finally, daylight provision, controlling the volume and diffusion of daylight across a space to create what it defines as an adequate subjective impression of lightness indoors. Sorry, it takes a bit of getting right that. This is the final aspect which we will be actually focusing on in the next few minutes. So factors influencing daylight, we have a wide variety of these that can impact that provision within a space. The most obvious consideration is around glazing, including its size and placement. Other factors can include layout and dimensions of the internal space, position of furniture, colour of paintwork and other finishes within rooms, and potential shading from nearby buildings or trees. As I mentioned at the start, the thickness of walls, of course, is another important consideration. When the reveals around the windows are deeper, light entering is focused into a narrower section, meaning you're more likely to end up with areas that are poorly lit. Often the insulation layer can therefore be a key determining factor of the thickness of these external walls. Now, over the past 30 years, the thermal performance U-value requirements for floors, walls and roofs have steadily increased, and that's a process we would expect to continue over the next decade as we move further towards net zero carbon buildings. As an example, there's recently been separate consultations into updates for Part L of the building regulations for new homes in England and Wales. These documents set the energy performance requirements for buildings, and in both cases we saw that the recommended U values within the notional dwelling type has become more demanding. So again, insulation will continue to be a key factor as these performance targets get more and more onerous over the coming years. Now, the key metric for measuring insulation performance to prevent heat loss is its thermal conductivity, also known as a lambda value. Lower the lambda value of the materials, the more effective it is at preventing that heat loss through conduction. This means specifying hopefully a slimmer insulation thickness without compromising on the U value. If we look at the sort of insulation market today, and you'll see a bit of a range across the slide in front of you, there's a huge difference between the performance of the available materials. Some commonly used materials such as extruded polystyrenes, XPS and rock mineral fibre have a conductivity of between 0.040 and 0.035, whereas phenolic insulation can be around as low as 0.018, so about twice as efficient. When we apply this to a wall construction, it can add up to, as I've said, a substantial saving in construction depth. Here, for example, we have identical cavity wall build-ups, which differ solely in their insulation specification. One using a full-fill rock mineral fibre with its thermal conductivity of 0.038, the other with a phenolic insulation with a 10 mm cavity. That is faced with a watertight, vapour-open polypropylene fleece and has a thermal conductivity of 0.018. So both constructions designed to achieve a U value of 0.16. To achieve this, the rock mineral fibre must be more than twice the thickness of the phenolic at 260 millimetres compared with just 115 millimetres. This gives an overall wall depth of 493 compared with 358 for the phenolic construction. We asked PUKES BV to consider how this may affect the depth of reveals around windows and consequently natural light levels within the space. Now, to do this, the firm carried out modelling calculating the amount of light within a room when using a number of different wall constructions with different insulation materials. And the metric they used to calculate how much light would reach occupants throughout the space was the average daylight factor. Put simply, this calculates the average amount of light reaching all areas within a space compared with external light. The result is expressed as a percentage, so 1% means that the internal light level is 1/100th that of the external light level. The ADF calculations used in a number of standards, including the visual comfort section within BREEAM. In most cases, a minimum ADF of 2% is recommended to meet good practice. EN 17037 that I talked about earlier, that adopts a slightly different approach based on daylight illuminance testing. However, its recommendations roughly equate to a more demanding ADF of around 3.2%. This could be particularly challenging to reach in urban locations, making it even more important really to look for the holistic gains. At the other end of the scale, BRE BR2094 suggests that interiors with ADFs of over 6% are likely to suffer from issues such as overheating. So ideally, ADFs should range between 2 to 5% for good daylight provision. Now, the assessment was carried out on daylighting calculations, looking at the difference in the ADF of a room, comparing the two insulations I mentioned previously. On this example, it's a rain screen cladding system. So the phenolic has a thermal conductivity of 0.020 and the mineral fibre 0.035. These products were used within the external wall facade build-ups to achieve 3 different U values for each type, 0.11, 0.15 and 0.21, incorporating 4 different facade layouts. As well as comparing phenolic insulation behind rain screen cladding system with that of rock mineral fibre, PUKES BV also carried out daylighting calculations to assess the ADF difference in the room for utilising the phenolic insulation in a cavity wall situation. A U value of 0.17 was considered when comparing rigid phenolic insulation with a 0.18 when we've utilised it in the cavity situation, and the mineral fibre in this situation is a 0.035. So the rain screen and the cavity is slightly different on the phenolic thermal conductivity. Now on the screen, you can see the results of the daylighting research with the facade build-up incorporating the 2 insulation types, and the percentage increase when we compare the ADF as well. And as you can see, the average light levels within the space increases notably more when the phenolic specification is used. Those differences are even more significant in the constructions with the most demanding U value targets. I'll just leave that just on the screen for 10 seconds for people just to look at that a bit deeper. And here you can see the results of the second two facade layouts. Again, the difference is more pronounced as the U-value targets become tougher. In the final results, the tested constructions and facade layouts featuring the phenolic insulation board all had a higher ADF than those with mineral fibre. The percentage of improvement in the relative ADFs ranged between 10.6% and 63.2% for rain screen build-ups, and for the cavity wall build-up, the percentage of improvement ranged between 13.7 and 23.2. In each case, the percentage improvement increased as U-value were lowered. Now, it's worth highlighting that whilst that research looks at new build applications, its results should have relevance for energy retrofits, where external or internal wall insulation is fitted. In those cases, it may not be possible to adjust the glazing size, so it may be even more important to consider the impact of the insulation specification. Ultimately, work to improve energy efficiency of both new and existing buildings should not come at the cost of occupant health and comfort. The research shows that by using thinner, more thermally efficient insulation, specifiers may therefore be able to notably increase internal light levels without having to compromise on the thermal performance. And those effects are likely to increase further when the more demanding performance targets are set. By taking this into account, we should be hopefully able to develop buildings which use energy and light efficiently, creating healthy environments which contribute towards global efforts to cut carbon. That's the end of the presentation, and thank you everyone so very much for listening.
Well, thank you very much for that. Have you had a lot of conversations about those issues with architects, and how aware have you found them to be in general terms?
I wouldn't say that for me it's been a huge thing recently. I think it's fair to say that my main focus has been, of course, on a lot of fire-related stuff recently, right, for fairly obvious reasons. Obviously, I think with Part L and Part B, there is a lot of focus that's going to come on both of those areas of the building regs in the near future. So I really welcome that engagement. I think we need to be so much better as a nation of using energy in general and making use of light and energy. It's quite often I hear a lot of debates around cost of energy. For me, that's the wrong thing. It should be about how we can use less energy. So I really, really welcome that, and I think we'll be having a big focus on that as part of our moving forward with our discussions on projects.
Yeah, well, absolutely, because that's taking us to not just our own well-being, but the well-being of our planet. I think, as I said at the beginning of today, that, you know, I think all of us are becoming more and more aware of well-being, whether it's in the sort of very focused way of well building standards, or just thinking about how places work and how they ought to work. So I'd like to thank you very much, Danny. I'd also like to thank all our speakers from today, and I'd like to thank both Kingspan and Oscar Acoustics for helping to make this possible, and obviously everybody who's taken part, everyone who's organised it, including all the people who've attended. I haven't looked at the numbers all the time, but I've certainly seen them sort of get up to 400, and I think they may have been more at some point. And on behalf of RIBA, on behalf of PiP, I'd just like to thank everybody for being here. I can't say it was nice to see you all, because I haven't seen you, but the lively conversations that have gone on just show how much people are engaged, and from how many parts of the world. So thank you all very much indeed, and I will look forward, I hope, to seeing you at the next event. And that's it. Thank you, and bye.